I often look for both machines and materials online that I might need for my workshop or for an upcoming project or job. In order to pick up those items, I often have to go on long drives across Germany. Along the way, I will often make stops to pick up old tools and antique objects that people sell in random lots. Often they are from an inheritance or from workshops that are closing their doors forever. These places are the last stop before these things would probably end up at scrap yards, which I might have visited last year once or twice as well. I now tend to collect these hand tools for a while, then muster my finds and restore them in larger numbers all at once. And that is what this video will all be about. On top of the tools that you see collected on this bench, a larger number of VISES, as well as various German woodworking tools and odds and ends, are going to appear in this video as well. There's a lot of work to be done, so let's get going. So let us begin then with this lot of axes and axe heads. They are almost exclusively from different parts of Germany or provinces that belong to Germany historically. Different sizes, shapes, traits, purposes, and also all sorts of different forges and factories that have often branded these tools with maker's marks that can sometimes survive for centuries. Identifying them and doing the research is a fun detective game that we will play later in this video. However, in order to do that, we will have to remove the rust from these things first. I have already prepared a bunch of containers filled with citric acid, as well as buckets of water to rinse the parts afterwards. As a first step, several axe heads were tied together and were then placed into the acid. In fact, the same thing just happened with almost all the tools I have just shown you. Since it's winter time in Germany though, and hence quite cold, the acid will need longer than usual to do its job. So we will first have to finish the work on other historic tools in the meantime that I have actually been working on for a while, before we will then return to the axes and other hand tools. Among those things are several German-made historic VISES of different styles that will require our attention. So let's take care of those then first. This vise came into my possession a while ago. I was driving through the German city of Essen and had noticed this vise on sale on an online marketplace. The owner had saved it from being scrap after it had served in a local business for decades. I bought it, but then only had a close look at it until much later. I knew from the beginning, though, that this vise had been made by Heuer from the town of Plettenberg in a part of Germany called Sauerland. Even though the shape of their vises varied over the decades, a Heuer vise stands out in that it is entirely made from forged steel instead of cheaper cast iron. While forged vises are usually welded together from much smaller sections using arc welding processes, this vise appears to consist of two huge forged parts, plus of course a few minor parts like the screws, nuts and handle. Heuer, now Brockhaus Heuer, still makes the successor to this vise in their factory in Germany to this day. But how old is this model? Well, unlike many other manufacturers, Heuer actually actively encourages the restoration of their older models. And there is sort of a wall of fame on their website where people have posted their restoration projects. On top of that, Heuer also displays an overview of all the different historic models on their website. My vise saying Heuer DRP and also number 6 turns out to be the largest variant of the oldest model, called the Heuer Primus or Heuer DRP, meaning Patent of the German Empire. The vise must have been made between 1927 and 1936 then, making it a pre-war model. The smallest version had a jaw width of only 55 mm, while the biggest ones were 175 or roughly 7 inches wide. This vise being an example of the largest available version. Unlike its later successors, this one opens in the back, with a movable jaw moving away from the user. That jaw unfortunately has been damaged in the past and will need to repair that damage. The screw is also pretty gunked up and the old rather nasty looking paint job flakes off rather easily. Let's see to it then that we take care of all of that and bring this vise back to its former glory. In past videos I have repaired several vises by using an oxyacetylene torch for brazing cracked or broken cast iron parts. This vise, however, is made from forged steel, which makes it much easier to weld, so the oxy torch won't be needed for that. However, a lot of prep work will have to be done. The vise needs to be partially disassembled and all paint needs to be removed as well. I started by wire wheeling the forged parts with a big angle grinder in order to remove as much paint and dirt as possible. Wire wheeling only works well for even surfaces and easily accessible parts though, and that's why I got to go through additional steps. For that, a gel-like chemical paint stripper was applied to remaining paint, and the forgings were then placed in garbage bags in order to retain the humidity of the paint stripper. Without that, the stripper will quickly dry in warm weather and not work very well at all. You can also use plastic wrap for this, but the garbage bag method has the advantage of making it easier to dispose of the old paint and sludge that you're left with in the end anyway. After washing off the sludge and drying the parts, they look rather dull, but another quick round of wire wheeling takes care of that rather quickly. In the meantime, I have also marked more severely damaged areas with a yellow pen in order to make it easier for you guys out there to see the extent of the damage. These spots will have to be ground out, down to clean bare metal as prep work for TIG welding, after which they will be ground and sanded down again. The right tool for this kind of job is the pneumatic rotary burr. It allows me to get in there and create a new, relatively even surface without taking away more of the original substance than necessary. A compressor with a big air tank is key here, since the rotary burr needs a lot of air and will run out of steam pretty quickly if you don't have that. The biggest of the 3 compressors that I built in 2024 allows me to do this. In the case of the most severely damaged spot, I had to grind away more than I had initially thought. The damage would have been caused by some form of abuse, of course, but there also might have been impurities or irregularities within the part that weren't driven out during the forging process. So I kept grinding until all I saw was shiny, undamaged steel. There was also a damaged spot close to one of the bolt holes on the foot of the vise, and I used the rotary burr here as well. So after disassembling, wire wheeling, paint stripping, more wire wheeling, and grinding out of the damaged spots, I was ready to rebuild these areas with my TIG welder. I started with the foot. The most important part here is that the welds are internally consistent and without impurities. Their outward appearance matters little, as they will soon be ground down anyway. I then proceeded to take care of the smaller grooves that I had just ground into the jaws of the vise, and it worked really well with just a few passes. Only then did I attempt to build up new material in the deepest of the grooves. I had preheated the vise for this with a torch and had to do numerous passes with a TIG welder to fill it all up and end up with just a little more material than I needed. And then I had to wait for everything to cool back down. It wouldn't make much sense to grind and sand hot steel like that. First I used an abrasive disc to remove the brunt of the excess material and then proceeded by sanding down the welds with sandpaper. I did that with all the affected areas until I was satisfied with the results. I don't mind minor nicks and signs of wear, by the way. I want to restore old tools to functionality, and I want to emphasize their raw beauty that is often covered under grime and nasty paint jobs. I'm however not interested in polishing a forged tool to make it look like stainless steel or some other modern gadget. That is also why I mixed different colors of hemorrhoid style paint together to find a shade of silverish dark gray that complements the look of forged steel or raw cast that I find in my historic vises and tools. And this is what the Hoyer vise looks like now. The next group of objects that we're going to have a go at is this set of 3 forged steel vises that I bought from a company a while ago that was about to scrap them. Just like with the big Hoyer vise, these tools spent their entire life in a professional workshop or factory. They all were bought on the same day many years ago, installed, used, and then discarded altogether. But hey, at least they always managed to stay together in good times and in bad. So while Germany, just like other places, used to have many different companies that made cast iron vises as well, for some reason forged steel vises by 2 competing companies became the standard for professional workshops in this country. Hoyer, now Brockhaus-Hoyer, and their competitor Peddinghaus, who are later known as Rigid Peddinghaus, combining distribution in North America with the traditional German brand and product. However, after 120 years, the vise production at Peddinghaus stopped on January 31st, 2023, ending this age-old rivalry, as is acknowledged on Heuer's website, making Heuer the last man standing. Today the Pettinghouse Matador is probably their best known vise, and you will see one or two examples of those later in this video as well. These three, however, are old Pettinghouse record models. The old logo is almost unreadable, but they would have looked just like this vise on this picture here that I found online. The three were all rusty and dirty, but they had not seen the same amount of use and abuse apparently. And in order to assess existing damage, I decided to first suspend them in citric acid to dissolve grime and remove rust. I then rinsed them and dried all the parts to inspect the vises more closely. I also wire wheeled the surfaces. Pettinghouse record number 1 actually has no real damage, just normal wear, and will be easy to restore. It's essentially just waiting for some grease and a fresh coat of paint. Record number 2 shows some rather deep cuts in the front jaw, as well as strike beads from stick welding, as well as a bunch of pits and chipped off pieces that will require some welding. Record number 3 arrived here in the worst shape out of the three, with lots of damage to the jaws, chipped off pieces of steel, welding beads and more. So from here on out I basically went through the same steps that we needed to restore the Heuer vise. I ground out all the defective spots in record number 2, for example those really noticeable angle grinder cuts in the front jaw, but some other spots as well. With number 3 I had to do way more grinding in order to prep it for TIG welding. Just have a look at this moonscape here that I created. And the welding is of course what followed next. So we went from the raw dirty state to ground out to material having been added and sanded back down, just like with the Heuer vise before. The handles of number 2 and 3 were then straightened using the oxy-fuel torch that I had used in earlier videos to do brazing on cast iron repairs, which often revolved around vise restoration as well. And after all that had happened, and it was actually a lot of work, it's just very repetitive, and that's why I don't show much of the footage here. All these vises were then painted with the same type of paint I used before. And this is what they look like now. Pettinghouse record number 1. Pettinghouse record number 2. And record number 3, which had so much damage and looked really nasty when I first bought it. But I'm now really happy how they turned out. Over the years, a lot of vises have piled up in my storage. Some of them were in good condition from the very beginning and no super interesting repair work was required. Let's still have a brief look at my little collection here though. I often buy equipment from businesses that are closing shop. And when you arrive there, you will often find out that they have way more to sell than what they listed online. On one of those occasions I saw this pallet with 3 enormous vises on them. I only bought one of them though, the one in the middle, because it seemed to be in very good condition. Having a closer look at it in my workshop, I found out that it was made by Oval. Weighing in at 55 kilograms or 121 pounds, it is one of the biggest bench vises that I have ever encountered. It is made from massive, high-quality castings and has exchangeable jaws that can be flipped around. It did not have any major problems, so I essentially removed rust and paint, applied new grease and a new paint job. And this is what this monster looks like now. If I had a bigger workshop, I would just keep it, because I'm quite sure that you'll be hard-pressed to find a better vise than this anywhere. Another German-made vise that I bought at one point is this odd contraption here. It's called an offset vise, well, because its jaws are offset to the side. It allows you to clamp long workpieces in a vertical position, where normally the base of the vise would block the path. I bought it because I knew that it was something special, without actually having the space for it. Rust and paint were removed, and it again received a new paint job. And this is what it looks like now. On top of that, I also restored 2 more forged steel vices, and I think both of them are Peddinghaus Matador vices from different eras, and here you can see them in their finished state. This Peddinghaus Matador's jaws are 150 millimeters wide, and the vice weighs roughly 18 kilograms. This is a somewhat smaller model. The jaws are 120 millimeters wide, and it roughly weighs around 10 kilograms. It would still be a reasonable size for many smaller workshops. We're almost done with the vices, but there is 2 more of them that I also want to show you. I found this beautiful cast iron vise in a workshop in rural Saxony on one of my many trips east. It is in great condition and weighs roughly 14 kilograms. The letters LES stand for Leipziger Eisen- und Stahlwerke, Iron and Steel Works in Leipzig, and that tells you that the vise was made in the East German city of Leipzig. And then, last but not least, a large lag vise for blacksmithing work. Forged from 50 kilograms or 110 pounds of steel and in great condition and a true piece of history, it is certainly one of the oldest vises that I have ever owned. I think I've held onto it for 15 years, used it a lot in my old workshop, but don't have the space for it anymore. So after spending all that time on those vise repairs, I'm sure we can take the other tools out of the acid bath. What you see here are pieces that I've just pulled out of that citric acid, and now I'm washing them in a bucket of ordinary water. This is not acid. What I do is that depending on the amount of rust and the outside temperature, I will pull the workpieces out of the acid, after a while wash them, and ever so carefully clean the surfaces with a piece of steel wool or a stainless steel scrubber. If there is still rust left, they go back into the acid. And I repeated that process until all axe heads and tools were free of rust. After washing them, speed is of the essence. They are quickly dried using various methods, then usually followed by wire wheeling. The oil is then rubbed in and excess material is wiped off. That's really all there is to it. With all that done, we can have a closer look at these axes and learn more about them. I've tried to group them together where it made sense. One of the more obvious ones is this axe made by Ochsenkopf, which is one of Germany's oldest axe forges, founded in 1781 in what is now the city of Wuppertal. Today owned by the Gedore Group, like so many other formerly independent toolmakers from that region. Their logo is the head of an ox in a circle, and ox head is exactly what Ochsenkopf means. And at first glance you would not believe that this axe here originated at the same place. The word Dankre doesn't mean anything in German, and it also doesn't sound like a German name that I ever heard of. But after stumbling over this old advertisement, I figured out that Dankre is just a composite of the first 3 letters of the name Daniel Kremendahl, who took over the Ochsenkopf brand in the early 19th century. A closer look at this advertisement from the 1940s even shows both brands next to each other. If it weren't for this old ad, I would never have known for sure that Dankre is actually short for Daniel Kremendahl. By the way, looking at the Ochsenkopf axe here, there's another symbol on there that is not an ox head, and just keep that in mind for later. These two here are very similar in shape and are also marked with single-digit numbers marking their size. I had to look really closely, especially with number 8 on the right, but they both have the same mark, displaying a winged figure that I believe to be an angel. Also the year 1855, for the founding of that company. It turns out that this was the logo of the tool factory Peter Floys, likewise from the city of Wuppertal, indeed founded in 1855. They ceased operations some 20 years ago though. Another axe where it took me a while to actually find the maker's mark is this one here. It shows a naked man standing on an axe and the letters WP. It took me a lot of effort to find anything, but I finally figured out that this is an axe made by Willy Pass, also from Wuppertal. I could, however, not find any other information about this maker. But then there were also a number of axe heads with logos and initials that simply don't mean anything to me. This axe has a beautiful little top hat on it with letters that I simply can't read. This one is stamped very distinctively, but the name just doesn't mean anything to me. Maybe the WER is for Werkzeug or Werkzeugfabrik tool or tool factory, and IO or JO could be initials. I have nothing. M&S, could that maybe be Hammerwerk Müller und Sohn from Austria? Just a guess, really. These axes here are almost certainly all from East Germany, because I bought them on a trip to Saxony, and many of them have stamps that clearly mark them as being made in the German Democratic Republic, stamps like GDR or TGL, which was the East German version of the DIN standard, are dead giveaways. This axe head appears to originate with the Soviet military, and since Russian soldiers first occupied German territory and then were also stationed in East Germany, that seems quite possible. At first I was puzzled by this lot here that I bought from the same guy in East Germany. They are unmarked, are quite heavy, have a rather massive wedge-shaped cross-section, yet appear rather long and narrow if you look at them from the side. I wasn't sure where they might have originated. However, by mere chance, I had a look at this old catalog of the Peter Wallbrecher tool factory, and it shows a very similar pattern, labeled as the Ermland type. While these axes are unlikely to be made by Wallbrecher in the West, they may have originated in the actual Ermland, a far eastern province that Germany lost after World War II. But I'm really just guessing here. Since they are non-symmetrical in their profile, are flat rather than wedge-shaped, and with a bevel on only one side and also slightly tilted to the side, I suspect that they are old woodworking or carpenter's axes, even though I'm not sure. Here's a picture of someone making wooden roofing shingles in Switzerland, and this axe looks at least similar to the ones I have here. The Swedish company Gränsfors still makes similar axes today. However, the traditional shapes in Sweden, Germany, Austria and other countries wouldn't have been identical, as these things varied even across different parts of Germany. The stamp on this axe is hardly existent anymore, and the name of the company unreadable at this point. However, there is the name of a place here, the city of Meschede. Well, actually it reads Eschede, which is another German town, but the first letter is clearly missing, so it must be Meschede, which is not too far from where I grew up. And after doing some research, I found that there was an axe and tool factory there called Wiebelhaus. And after I had found this old ad here, I was able to find a picture of another Wiebelhaus axe that clearly shows a complete logo in a very similar style. However, there's also that strange symbol again that we saw in the very beginning on that Ochsenkopf axe. Again, just keep it in mind for now. And here a group of axes that at face value all have different maker's marks, yet they all belong together through a long history of business relationships, mergers and acquisitions. Specimen 1, a mysterious raven sitting on an axe head. Specimen 2, a crown with the initials CH inside of it. Specimen 3, the same kind of crown but no initials. Number 4 then, an axe marked looks, but then when you flip it on its head you can find the letters HW, just like in this otherwise unmarked axe, specimen 5. Specimen 6, an eagle carrying the world in its fangs. Specimen 7, an eagle but without that globe. Specimen 8, a more modernized, stylized eagle. And then specimen 9, the crown again, but instead of CH it says 1844. So how are all these different things related? Well, these axes belong to two brands with a long history of their own that have just recently come together in one place. These brands are Helco and Adler. But what is going on with all these logos? Well, here's what I've been able to come up with. Compared to Great Britain, Germany was late to the Industrial Revolution. However, it had a lot of things going for it. Among those things were several deposits of iron ore, as well as vast amounts of black coal and abundant water and rivers to power forges and other industrial operations. A handful of manufacturing centers clustered around the resources iron, coal and water, and that's one of the reasons why the city that is now called Wuppertal, as well as its sister cities Remscheid and Solingen, became one of the major centers of tool manufacturing in Europe. Hundreds of forges and adjacent workshops were being operated in these cities at the same time and in very close proximity. One of those many businesses was the tool factory Karl Helsper, founded in 1842, that used the crown, often with the initials CH as its logo. However, only 2 years later, and in that same town, another tool factory was founded going by the same family name, but this time it was August Helsper instead of Karl, and their logo was a bird sitting on an axe head, as well as a winged helmet. Another ad from 100 years later shows the strange triangular symbol again, and still I have no idea what that was all about. Much later, in 1957, the August Helsper tool factory also registered the brand name Helco Werk with the three letters HEL, Hel, from the family name Helsper, and the KO, apparently from a business partner called Kotthaus. Again, sometime later, in the year 1970, August Helsper bought the Karl Helsper factory. At that point, the two would have existed as separate entities for almost 130 years. The name Helco Werk was used for the two combined companies from this point onward, and the HW initials that we found on the looks and on the otherwise unbranded eggs would have been made by Helco then as well. And the last egg set that I just showed, this one here, it might look old, but it is actually brand new. It as well has the initials HW on the bottom side. Lux, by the way, used to be an independent tool factory from Remscheid long time ago, but has been an in-house brand for one of the big hardware stores in Germany for quite some time now, and Helco probably made that X for that hardware store. What about the eagle symbols though, and how do these things relate? The Adler tool factory was founded by Josef Schmidt in 1911, and that was not in Wuppertal for a change, but in another part of the country, in a town called Waghäusel near Heidelberg. This company has been in continuous operation since then, and produces high-quality axes made in Germany to this day. Some of you might remember that I have actually mentioned Adler before, because this axe here is actually a leftover from a video that I produced about a year ago. At the time, I was trying to contact someone at Adler to get confirmation that this axe was indeed made by them. It is often quite hard for me to establish contact with German companies, by the way, as the world of the internet and of YouTube videos, particularly in English, is completely foreign to them. However, the people at Josef Schmidt/Adler were super friendly and invited me to visit their factory and film there as well. So, long story short, I actually went there not once but twice, so that's where we're going next. The way from Köln, where I live, to Waghäusel, or to be more specific, Wiesenthal, is more than 250 kilometers. And since I actually visited a friend on the way, it took me an entire day to get there. Josef Schmidt Werkzeug, the traditional maker of axes and gardening tools branded Adler, recently took over the brand Helco as well, including all the know-how, patterns and remaining stock, and is now making the Helco axes at their factory in Waghäusel after Helco in Wuppertal had to close the factory, well, after a number of years of financial hardship. This is also the home of the Wagnum brand, by the way. While I'm used to telling you about places that have long since gone, it was nice to see this factory running at full capacity after 115 years of operation. When I sent my first email to this company a year ago, it was the boss himself who answered my question and told me that my old axe had been made here some 50 years ago. He is the heir of the original founders and has employed other young people to grow this company in this 21st century we live in. All the parts are made on site here in Germany. These huge wooden piles are hickory. The wood is dried and used to make the handles for Adler and Helco tools and axes. Next to modern CNC machines and robots, there are also a lot of older machines up and running and being used in daily production. Gigantic friction presses and other remnants from another era are used to forge the axes and gardening tools on site. The company also recently purchased a new power hammer. By the way, this is not a sponsorship or paid collaboration of any kind. I did not ask for money because I simply want to support one of the few remaining companies making traditional tools in this country, while also handing over important roles to a younger generation that is starved for optimism and needs a world that they can actually form and build, rather than being stuck in serving roles or temporary employment while older generations refuse to give up control. And I think these guys here are a good example to look up to. And let me just show you some of the products that they make here at this factory, because that might actually say more than 1,000 words. I'll show you some samples that I picked from their catalog that I happen to like a lot. This 1600 gram Halco axe is a traditional German, or rather Rhineland style axe that I like because of its traditional form. I think they call it a Bavarian forest axe or Bavarian woodworker axe at Halco. And here is one of their smallest axes that might be useful next time I'm going to do any bushcrafting, I think. It's quite cute. And then I simply couldn't resist to ask them to give me this one as a sample, a big double-edged Halco axe. Will I ever need this for practical purposes? Of course I will. And this box here is filled with wood shavings from the actual company, used as padding material, pretty brilliant. It also comes with a few little items to keep the axe in good condition. And it contains a style of axe that is rather unusual in Germany, but probably quite common over in America. Well, at least over here it's sometimes called a lumberjack or Yankee axe. So anyway, I'm a sucker for these things, and if you ever think about buying a brand new axe for yourself, or maybe a present for your dad, maybe check out Halco and Adler. They have websites in English and will ship around the world. Among the objects that I had shown you in the beginning of the video was more than just vices and axes though. Wrenches, files, rasps, chisels, pliers, and all kinds of odds and ends. All of those tools have been taken care of during the preparations for this video. However, I am unable to show you all of the work in this video today. It is just too much to cover in one episode. Growing up in a home that had its own woodworking shop, and being the son of a woodcarver and accomplished woodworker and artisan in many fields, I often feel touched when I see old woodworking tools, even though I don't really need them myself that much. I have collected all these wood chisels over the years and have finally come around to have a closer look at them. The surfaces were sandblasted and sanded to some degree. I did not replace the old handles, as most of them seemed still just fine to me. Almost all of them are from German brands like Spannsäge, Kirschen and others, many of them made in Wuppertal and Remscheid. Among these items also were beautiful dividers, scissors, oil cans and many other beautiful tools, like those really cool old hacksaws. I've also found the time to restore a new batch of historic German military toolboxes that I have sold to some of you guys in the past. Some of them are now available again. It is getting harder and harder though, and there might come a time when none of them will be left to restore. As I have shown earlier in this video, there are actually many other items that I took care of during this whole process, but it is simply too much for me to show it all in this one episode. However, we will cover most of those items in future videos. Making this video took a lot of effort, time and money, from driving half across the country to performing the restoration work, followed by days and days of research and an entire week of sifting through 1 million video files to then edit the final video. If you want to help with the production of future videos like this, you can do that by making a donation or becoming a supporter on Patreon under patreon.com/tpa